We are live now. So begin with hello everyone, good afternoon and good evening. A very warm welcome to the final session before the closing of day 6 and the festival, the third international conference and the POP Festival for Youth-led Climate Action 2021. We are delighted to have you all join us for one of the biggest youth-led events for the climate action. My name is Drishya Pathak and I'm a public health professional and a POP youth mentor in the POP movement. The POP family is excited to welcome you to this final session on future of youth climate advocacy with Professor Michael Mann, who will share his wisdom on climate advocacy with us, and we'll also have four young youth joining us today who will be sharing and reflecting on their climate advocacy and critical components to effective climate action. With that, I would like to introduce to you all our expert, Professor Michael Mann, distinguished professor of atmospheric science at Penn State, with joint appointment in the Department of Geosciences and Earth and Environmental System Institute. He is also the director of Penn State Earth System Science Center. Mann is the author of several books, including his most recent work, The New Climate War, which shows how fossil fuel companies have waged a 30-year campaign to deflect blame and responsibility and delay action on climate change and offer a battle plan for how we can save the planet. I would like to invite Professor Michael.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks to all of you. Thanks, Ash, and everybody else for making this happen. And thanks for your efforts. I assume that I was asked to speak at this session about the youth climate movement because of my youth. No, that's just, it's all relative, isn't it? But I am, in fact, inspired by what young folks are doing today. And while I'll be talking about the challenges that we face, and that's really the topic of my book. In fact, I will get my presentation going. Oh, the host has disabled participant screen sharing, so somebody needs to enable that for me.
Can you try?
I am a co-host now, so there we go. Let's make sure we do that, optimize that, and we should be good to go. Everyone see my first overhead here?
Yes.
Yep, great. Well, so I'm going to talk about the challenges that we face today in the effort to avert catastrophic planetary warming. It's the topic of my recent book, The New Climate War. But as I think will become clear over the course of my presentation, the future of youth climate advocacy, which is the session here, it really is part of what inspires me and has convinced me that we can rise to the occasion, that we can meet the challenge. So let me start out by talking about just the basics here, the projections, what the science has to say. And I won't even talk about the latest climate models, state-of-the-art global climate models. I'm going to show you a back of the envelope calculation that was done in the early 1980s, decades ago, by none other than ExxonMobil, by scientists at ExxonMobil. And they successfully predicted both the increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide pollution in the atmosphere and the warming that would result from that. They predicted that decades ago. They knew exactly where we were headed if we continued to remain addicted to fossil fuels. They, in fact, described in that internal report, and it was a secret report, it was eventually leaked out to the public. They described the potential impacts of that warming. These aren't my words, these aren't Al Gore's words. These are ExxonMobil's own scientists describing the impacts of that warming as potentially catastrophic. But instead of coming forward and engaging the public and policymakers in an effort to do something about the problem, they instead got rid of that scientific division and spent tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in a massive disinformation campaign. to convince us that there was no problem, that we didn't need to take action. Now, if we had taken action decades ago when the science was already clear, as you can see here, we could have brought those carbon emissions down fairly gently in time to avert catastrophic warming. But what decades of inaction have now bought us is a much steeper trip down this slope. We've got to bring our carbon emissions down by a factor of 2 now within the next decade if we are to prevent a catastrophic 1.5 degrees Celsius, roughly 3 degrees Fahrenheit warming of the planet. And the impacts are no longer subtle. The catastrophic impacts that ExxonMobil predicted, well, we're seeing them play out today in the form of unprecedented heat waves in the United States and Europe and around the world, year after year. Last year here in the United States, last summer, the hottest temperature ever reliably recorded on the planet in Death Valley, 130 degrees Fahrenheit. A very marked increase in the frequency and intensity of heat waves worldwide. And you take that heat, you take the drought, hotter temperatures baking the soils, dries them out. So you have heat, you have drought. You put those together and you get catastrophic wildfires like we see play out now every year in California, in the Western United States, where to some extent the fire season has become perpetual. Wildfires can happen any time of the year now out in California. And 5 of the 6 largest fires on record were burning last year. We've already seen the conditions now this spring and into this summer that are leading to another catastrophic fire season. And I found this particular Washington Post article, this recent Washington Post article, rather ironic because it's talking about the drought and the fire danger that California faces. And it was literally brought to you by ExxonMobil, literally and figuratively. This advertisement appears with the article in the Washington Post, but of course it's the actions of ExxonMobil and other fossil fuel companies that have led us to this point, that have prevented the action that would have been necessary to avert these catastrophic impacts. And we see them not just, in the Northern Hemisphere, but in the Southern Hemisphere. Last year, I was down in Australia on sabbatical, living through what they now call the Black Summer, this summer of unprecedented heat and drought where bushfires literally blanketed the continent. And many of you have probably seen the scenes that came out of that. Again, that almost apocalyptic episode. In this case, this kangaroo in the foreground with these blazing fires behind it. That was a year ago. Now the same region, New South Wales in Australia, this year, they saw this instead. And no, your eyes aren't deceiving you. That's a house floating down a river. Catastrophic, unprecedented flooding in the same region that saw those unprecedented wildfires a little more than a year earlier. Now, some of the critics would say, well, you climate scientists, you can't make up your mind. Which is it? Is it heat and drought and wildfire, or is it floods? Well, the fact is that it's both. The science tells us that we're likely to see more of these extremes in places like Australia, in California, where you go from wildfires to mudslides. You see more extreme events on both sides of the spectrum. The science demonstrates that that is a consequence of a warmer planet. And these events that we see now play out in real time. They're no longer subtle. The impacts of climate change are no longer subtle. We don't have to squint. We don't have to tease the signal out of the climate data. We can see it playing out in real time. This is the face of climate change. And that's 1 degree, a little more than 1 degree Celsius. Imagine what 4 degrees Celsius would do, because that's where we ultimately may be headed if we don't fundamentally address this crisis. So the climate wars are this assault on efforts to do something about climate by fossil fuel interests and conservative media outlets that do their bidding, conservative politicians that do their bidding. It's what has come to be known as the climate wars. And I will suffice it to say, if I had more time, I would play this clip. But just a few years ago, I was testifying, for example, to the House of Representatives in the United States, their science committee, which was led by Lamar Smith, a climate change denier. That's where we were just a few years ago. But climate change denial has really all but disappeared from our public discourse over the past several years because the impacts have become so obvious, because it's impossible to convince people that nothing is happening when they can see it playing out in real time with their own two eyes. So instead, we're subject to a new form of climate wars, what I call the new climate war. As we move away from outright denial of the basic science, we encounter other tactics by the forces of inaction, the fossil fuel interests and those doing their bidding, the inactivists, as I call them. And that takes the form of soft denial. Well, maybe it's happening, but it's not really a problem. And the scientists are exaggerating the science. And you really don't need to worry. It's very common now to see people like Bjorn Lomberger or Michael Schellenberger who present themselves as climate advocates who accept the science, but meanwhile actually downplay the impacts and downplay the need to actually do something about the problem in books that are often widely advertised by the Murdoch media, the right-wing media, newspapers like The Australian. The latest in this sort of this series of soft denialist tomes, books, that don't literally deny the basic evidence, but downplay the impacts and downplay the need to move away from fossil fuels. The latest example of this, a book that's being promoted in conservative circles on the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal, for example, book by Steve Koonin, who represents himself as a prior Obama administration scientist. In fact, he was nothing of the sort. He was actually brought in as a contrarian by Stephen Chu, who was the Department of Energy administrator at that time, precisely because they wanted to hear what climate change critics had to say about their efforts. So this is used, this sort of soft denial. Well, maybe it's happening and maybe it's at least partly human caused, but it's not really a problem. And if we do anything about it, that'll destroy the economy. And, we just need to allow the marketplace to innovate and the problem will solve itself. These sorts of delay tactics. So we've got soft denial, we've got delay, and you'll see a pattern here, a number of words, a litany of words that begin with D that describe the tactics in the new climate war. Delayism. We don't need to reduce carbon emissions. We just need to adapt to the changes that are coming, says Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida, or Scott Morrison, the current Prime Minister of Australia, who has really downplayed the threat of climate change and has refused to take meaningful action as Prime Minister of Australia. We see geoengineering promoted as a solution. We don't need to stop the burning of fossil fuels. We can do something else. We can shoot particles into the stratosphere that'll block out the sunlight. We can dump iron into the ocean to try to fertilize the algae. We can build huge sucking machines that'll just suck the CO2 back out of the atmosphere. What could possibly go wrong? Well, of course, a lot could possibly go wrong. The principle of unintended consequences reigns supreme when we talk about these massive potential interventions with the global climate system, but they've become very popular by people who want to sound like they're talking solutions while not actually advocating meaningful solutions. People like Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of ExxonMobil, who dismissed climate change as an engineering problem. We can just engineer our way out of it, but we can continue to burn those fossil fuels in the meantime. Bill Gates, in fact, has argued for geoengineering and other potentially dangerous options like nuclear energy, because he downplays the role that renewable energy can play in moving us off fossil fuels. Downplays the evidence that we can, in fact, solve this problem with existing technology. We don't need a miracle, Bill Gates. He's asserted that we need a miracle to solve this problem. And he's also said that he doesn't know the political solution to this problem. Well, then he doesn't know the solution to this problem because it's not physical, it's not technology. We have the technology in the form of existing renewable energy to wean ourselves off fossil fuel. What we need is the political will to actually implement those technologies. And I argue that that's a much safer path forward, is scaling up existing renewable energy technology to decarbonize our economy now, rather than relying on some promise of future technology that'll magically solve this problem decades down the road, potentially leading us decades down the wrong path. We see deflection. We don't need policies. We don't need subsidies for renewable energy. We don't need to block fossil fuel infrastructure. We don't need a price on carbon. We just need individuals to be more responsible, to decrease their individual carbon footprints. This was a campaign that was used by the beverage industry, Coca-Cola, decades ago, and the beverage industry to defeat bottle bills that would have provided a systemic solution to the accumulating problem of bottle and can litter, which has now given rise to the global plastic pollution crisis. They instituted a campaign to convince the American people that we didn't need to do anything. We didn't need policies. We just needed to clean up those bottles and cans. Well, the fossil fuel industry has run with that same playbook, and we see a lot of messaging, even in prominent mainstream news outlets like the New York Times, that tell us about all of the things that we can do to decrease our individual carbon footprint. Look, the first individual carbon footprint calculator was provided in the early 2000s by none other than British Petroleum, BP, because they and other fossil fuel companies wanted us so focused on our individual carbon footprint that we failed to take notice of theirs. 70% of global carbon emissions come from just 100 polluters. And so while we should all do those things that we can do in our everyday lives to decrease our environmental impact and our carbon footprint, we should, of course, do those things, but we can't allow polluters to try to convince us that that alone is the solution to the problem, because neither you nor I can put a price on carbon, can provide subsidies for the renewable energy industry, can block new fossil fuel infrastructure. We need our policymakers to support policies that will do that. So we've got soft denial, we've got delay, we've got deflection. What else can they give us? Division. Look, if they can get us fighting with each other about our individual carbon footprint, about our individual lifestyle choices, if they can get us finger pointing at each other, why aren't you a vegan? Why do you still fly? That's a great way to divide the climate movement so that we don't present a united front demanding action. And the inactivists have taken to social media. They use bot armies and trolls to get us fighting with each other, to divide us on social media. They attack opinion leaders like John Kerry, accusing them of hypocrisy, for example, because they still use air travel, as a way of discrediting them as messengers, as opinion leaders. And, it's no mystery who's doing this. Where does it appear? The Murdoch press, the New York Post, Fox News. We know who's promoting this, this division and this deflection. And it's fossil fuel interests and the media outlets and the politicians that promote them. But sometimes we get friendly fire. That means circular firing squad, progressives attacking each other, as I said before, that sort of internal conflict, that division. And one excellent example of that is Michael Moore, the sort of liberal film, progressive film director, known for his progressive messages in the past about the gun crisis, about any number of social issues. A year ago, published or put forward, offered his latest effort in the form of a film called Planet of the Humans, which attacked renewable energy, which actually sought to discredit renewable energy as a solution to the climate crisis. And why, Michael Moore decided to give that gift to big oil. It was a gift to climate change deniers looking to throw cold water on a critical component of decarbonization, renewable energy. Why he did that, I'm not sure we'll ever know. But we can look at who was promoting that film, because it was conservative organizations funded by people like the Koch brothers, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Heartland Institute. They were promoting the film. Breitbart News promoted the film. The Murdoch media couldn't get enough of this film. They loved the narrative of environmental progressives fighting with each other, and they loved this narrative discrediting renewable energy, the key competitor with fossil fuel energy and a critical tool, again, in our effort to decarbonize our economy. So that's deflection, division, and we've got doomism. Look, if the forces of inaction can convince us it's too late to do anything about the problem, it potentially leads us down the same path of inaction as outright denial. And they don't care about the path we take, they just care about the destination. They want us disengaged. And whether it's because we deny that climate change is real, or we deny that we can do anything about it, it potentially leads towards disengagement. And this is one of the more pernicious of the tactics used in the new climate war, because it really targets environmental progressives. It targets people of goodwill and good intentions who would otherwise be on the front lines demanding action, but it convinces them that it's too late and leads them again to disengagement. And so when we encounter people who have fallen victim to this erroneous framing, and it is erroneous, the doomism is often premised on a distortion of the science that's every bit as bad as the distortions of the science we see on the other side. For example, the idea that we're undergoing runaway warming and all life on Earth will be extinct in 10 years no matter what we do. That's absolute nonsense, but too many people now believe that. They've fallen victim to that misleading framing. We have to help them out. We have to make them understand that it's not too late to act, that the science tells us there is still time to act, so that we get them back out on the front lines advocating for change. And winning the war is about urgency and agency. Urgency, sure, look, we'll get past the COVID-19 crisis. A year from now, we'll look in largely, it will largely be in the rearview mirror as we look back. But still, every bit as dangerous and deadly, and in fact, more deadly, is the crisis that will still remain, the climate crisis. Just the other day, a new article demonstrating that 1/3 of heat deaths globally can now be attributed to climate change. So this is the greatest health threat and threat to life that we have yet faced. There is obvious urgency, and we need to bring those carbon emissions down dramatically, as we already saw. But there is agency. We have the tools to do this. Existing renewable energy. We need policies that scale it up, policies that decarbonize our economy. And we're seeing some success already in efforts to decarbonize our economy. 2019, global carbon emissions flatlined. They stopped increasing. That's a critical development. And we know from the International Energy Agency that that was attributable to the move away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. It's not happening fast enough, but it is happening, and it's already starting to bend that curve downward. Flattening the curve is the first step in bending it downward. And we're seeing all the signs now. Renewable energy has really taken a foothold over the last several years in the United States, in Australia, and around the world. The wind and solar boom is here, said the New York Times just a couple months ago. Prices, if you look at levelized costs of renewable energy, they already outcompete fossil fuel energy and certainly nuclear energy. So it makes sense in terms of the health of the planet, and it makes sense in terms of our economy to move away from fossil fuels, to move towards renewable energy. Now, last year, we saw a big drop. At its peak, about 17%. By the end of the year, it was about 7%, a 7% drop in global carbon emissions. And if we can keep that up year after year for the next decade, that keeps us on that path to reducing carbon emissions by a factor of 2 within the next decade. Keeps us on that path towards averting a catastrophic 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. The problem is that that decrease in large part was temporary. It was due to lockdown policies, social distancing, decreased transportation. We've already seen carbon emissions bounce back a bit. And so what that tells us is that we're not going to get those emissions reductions that we need from lifestyle changes alone. We need to fundamentally decarbonize our economy. Just recently, the International Energy Agency in their latest report came forward and said, we can do it. We can still avert a catastrophic 1.5 degrees Celsius warming of the planet. That was a bold assertion for an organization that's been very conservative when it comes to the role of renewable energy. And they were very blunt in this report. They said, but if we're to do that, there can be no new fossil fuel development. We've got to stop any new fossil fuel infrastructure if we're to do that. And we're seeing some signs of hope, some rays of hope that we might be able to do that. The US and China are back at the bargaining table now that we have a president in Joe Biden who's willing to actually lead on climate, who is pledged to decreasing our own carbon emissions by a factor of 2 by 2030, a very bold pledge that's being met by other countries, the UK, Europe. The G7 nations have agreed to end support for coal, which is the worst of the fossil fuels when it comes to carbon pollution. That's a major development. And just now, every day in our news cycle, there's a new success story. Dutch Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, ordered to cut their carbon emissions by 45% by 2030. We're seeing oil companies' internal dissent, their own stockholders putting pressure on them to move away from fossil fuels. Just yesterday, you might have seen this news. The Keystone XL pipeline is dead. This is the pipeline that my colleague and friend James Hansen said would be game over for the planet, for the climate. If we were to construct that pipeline, it would deliver so much of that dirty tar sands oil from Canada that we would blow past any carbon budget for limiting warming below catastrophic levels. But that project has been abandoned in part because of the pushback by the public and policymakers against increased fossil fuel infrastructure. What fundamentally gives me optimism, we see a favorable shift in the political winds. We see a real sign that later this year, in Glasgow at the next climate of the Conference of the Parties, COP26, we may be in a position to get those commitments that we need from the nations of the world to hold warming below catastrophic levels. So there's some good news. The most important thing, though, what really gives me cautious optimism is the youth climate movement, because more than anything else, this has recentered this issue where it should have been all along. It's not really about science or policy or politics or economics. It's about ethics, our ethical obligation not to destroy this planet for future generations, for our children, for our grandchildren. That's still a possible future. We can prevent that future if we act boldly and immediately. So there is urgency, but there is agency. There is still time to make sure that our legacy is not one of a degraded planet for our children and grandchildren. That's one possible future, but it doesn't have to be our future. And so this is our moment. This is our time to act. And I'll be happy to, if we have time for a question or two, be happy to address those.
Thank you so much, Professor Michael. I think the presentation was full of facts, science, and all that information that is needed for the youth advocates who are currently part of the meeting and watching this to understand how they can create change just by learning from the science, stating facts, and just pushing and pushing and pushing for what they believe in. So that's what I got from your presentation, and I'll take away with this with me. um, I wonder if Dr. Ash wants to say something before we take any questions.
Yes, I just want to thank Professor Mann for sharing. I also highly recommend the book that Professor Mann is referred to in the research that he's just shared. It's not only informative, it's fact-based, and it provides very clear direction, and underscores a lot of the reality that we're living through and what really counts in terms of being able to make a difference and urgently addressing the issue of climate change. So I'd like to thank Professor Mann very, very much for sharing and for all the work he's done through his lifetime, but for the guidance that you provide, especially the youth movements, which you've also referred to extensively, not just in your presentation but also in your book. So I will share the details of the book in the chat so that everybody is able to access it. And sorry, Professor Mann.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to say, Tricia, just to be cognizant of time and Professor Mann's commitments. I know we have some young leaders here, and if you could invite them to share and any questions or comments and conversation that we can open up to, please. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Professor Mann.
I have a question.
Yes.
My name is Inu Yoa. I'm 15. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Sort of.
we can.
How would you go about confronting big money making companies that rely on fossil fuels as their main way of making money?
Thanks. It's a great question, Ian. And ultimately, they have to disappear. We cannot allow the continued extraction and burning of fossil fuels. So what I would say is that those companies need to reimagine themselves as energy companies. They need to move away dramatically from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. And they can survive if they choose to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Unfortunately, some of those companies, as we've seen, have worked actively to thwart any efforts to move in that direction. And finally, we're starting to see repercussions. We're starting to see new fossil fuel infrastructure, loans denied. We're seeing the finance world now moving away from the funding of fossil fuel infrastructure, which is a really important development. We're seeing, again, the G7 nations have basically said that they are going to now move away from allowing more fossil fuel infrastructure. And those companies that move the quickest away, those energy companies that move most dramatically away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy and climate-friendly policies are the ones who are going to thrive in that atmosphere. So we need rules, obviously. We need incentives, policies that disincentivize fossil fuels, that provide incentives for renewable energy, that help move companies in that direction. But we also need companies to be willing participants in that transition. And those that refuse to will need to be penalized using every means that there is, every means at our disposal. And one of the most important tools, of course, is our voice. And I would just point out that OPEC, which is a consortium of global fossil fuel, global oil producers, the largest oil producers in the world, have said that the greatest threat that they face is Greta Thunberg and the youth climate movement. Because even their own children, these fossil fuel executives, even their own children now are saying, mommy, daddy, why are you doing this? You're ruining the planet for me. They're feeling the pressure. They're feeling the heat. When Greta said, I want you to panic, my interpretation was what she meant is she wants them to feel that heat, to feel that pressure. And it's happening.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you, Ian.
I would like to now invite the young presenters. We can start with Carter from Pop US. He from One Less Straw and One More Generation. He will be telling us more about what he does and what his project is all about. Carter, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you give me 5 minutes? I'm in the middle of a family medical emergency.
Okay.
Please.
So I would like to now invite me from FXB Climate Advocates to please share her experience and tell us more about what she has been advocating. Me.
Thank you so much for having me today. Share my screen. Can you give me access to share my screen?
Yeah, sure.
Reset.
Yes, hold on. There's some problem right here.
Okay, maybe Summer can speak while Nee gets set up, if that's gonna help. Just in order to keep it time, please.
I would like to invite Summer Benjamin. Summer, can you hear us?
I can, and I don't have a visual presentation, but I'll just tell you about my journey. So as Drishya and Ash said, my name is Summer Benjamin. I'm a POP youth ambassador for the Caribbean. I'm Antiguan American and I live on St. Thomas in the US Virgin Islands. I started out my journey in climate action with a love for the ocean and a knowledge that youth need to take initiative in the movement. So I started off living in California in the mountains, far from the ocean. So I didn't really know what I could do that would be impactful. So I soon realized that one aspect that I could change in my community was how much single-use plastics that restaurants were using. And so soon after I realized that, I created a project working with the restaurants in my community to help them reduce their single-use plastic usage called Eco Eaters. I found that when dealing with restaurants and these type of businesses, it's best just to take the most direct approach. So when talking to them, me and the rest of my team just went right into the restaurants and approached the manager and asked them about their practices regarding single-use plastics and to-go materials and all that kind of stuff. So this approach led us to stay in contact with many of the restaurants that we just walked into and help create a plan with them over time to start reducing their single-use plastics. And so this project, the reason why we thought the restaurants would be willing to work with us is because we would help them with a financial incentive in a way that we would help promote them in the newspapers and on different types of social media, advertising that they were sustainable and taking steps, even if they weren't already using biodegradable materials that weren't single-use plastics, that we would advertise that they were doing so. And since we knew many of the tourists visiting the mountains would come from the San Francisco Bay Area, we assumed that they would be familiar with the issues and wanting to potentially go to restaurants that were taking a more sustainable approach and cutting down their single-use plastics. So we were able to make some impact in the community by having a few restaurants fully convert to using no single-use plastics with their to-go materials. And we were able to advertise them and hopefully get them some more customers, but we were able to make some real impact in our community. So after starting this project, I really wanted to share it with the world and meet other youth as well. So I got in contact with the pop team and I presented at the very first pop festival in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And this opened up so many doors for me to connect with other youth and experts that were able to help me and certainly inspire me to continue on this journey. And so I also was able to present at other conferences with POP and other organizations in the environmental field. And I was one of the MCs with Carter at the World Sustainable Development Forum, which had experts at the UN level, which was really amazing to interact with. And since I'm Caribbean American, I wanted the opportunity to live in the Caribbean so that I could potentially make a lasting impact there. So I convinced my mom to let us move to St. Thomas in the US Virgin Islands, which is where I am now, so that I could bring some more environmental action here. And so I'm now working to implement my Eco Eaters project here and help the restaurants here reduce their single-use plastic, which is very much needed because a lot of them still use styrofoam in their to-go boxes and cups and all that kind of materials. So I knew that the Caribbean people would want to keep their islands beautiful and their oceans plastic-free. So I have been working with lots of engagement in the community, creating opportunities for beach cleanups where there's been very high involvement as the Caribbean people really, really care and want to take action. And I'm so grateful to the POP team for giving me the opportunity and the platform to share my experiences. And my plans for the future are to study meteorology so that I can further my knowledge about the science behind the extreme weather changes and more ways that we can mitigate the effects. So that's me.
Thank you, Summer. This was so inspirational, and what a great journey. And I'm sure you have a lot more miles to go. I would now like to invite if Nee is ready to make a presentation, or Carter, whoever is ready to go. Okay, we are going with Nee. Okay, great.
Okay. Okay, so my name is Nee Sam, and I am a member of the Advocacy Climate Advocate Program. And my presentation today will be about climate change and COVID-19. So like this past year has been a tough year for everyone. So like, yeah, we've been under two really big crises, and they are similar in multiple ways, including that they can affect millions of lives and disrupt our economy. However, the energy that are put it toward climate change isn't the same as COVID-19. Like people think COVID-19 is like as an immediate threat, life-threatening issue, but like for climate change is like more of a longer term crisis. So they think like, okay, we have time to we can address it later. But so like it's so important that we talk about the climate crisis and see climate change and public health as two interconnected issues, and we talk to people and get them understand that if we don't solve the climate problem right now, like it can lead to many outbreaks in the future, just like the COVID-19. So like, yeah, so the connection between COVID-19 and climate change is like climate change makes the condition more favorable for infectious disease to spread, and people live in areas with poor air quality have more chance of dying from COVID-19, and both crises disproportionately affect people of color and marginalized communities. So so we can see that two crises have highlighted the inequalities in our society, and so as countries try to recover after the COVID, we should look at solutions that to build as we try to build a more resilient and sustainable economy. It's important first to tackle the inequalities and the injustice in our society within COVID recovery. Yeah. So climate action climate action post COVID-19. So COVID-19 has taught us a lot of lessons that can be applied to address climate change. It's now our opportunity to redesign our economy and our system and bring in the transformation. So the pandemic has disrupted our economy. So we should prioritize climate smart investment and consider more nature-based solution. And COVID has also taught us to listen to health experts and the scientists, and since the solutions for crisis are interconnected, the best way to prepare for and respond to different crises in the future is building resilient systems at all scales. So as for COVID-19, we can see that changes in personal consumption habits, we cut down traveling and move to virtual platform. So that's a positive thing that we can see from as a result of COVID-19. But although individual actions is important, it cannot solve the whole problem. So we also need systemic change. We can draw example from COVID-19, people, it's important that people wearing masks and follow the rules of social distancing, but also the government need to make systemic change, ordering business closures and cut down international traveling and provide financial assistance. So some of the individual climate action post COVID-19 is that, from my experience,
in the middle of a session. I'm in a session.
With COVID-19 has made a lot of change in my lifestyle and my habits, and some of those can have positive impact on the environment if I continue to keep the habit. During coronavirus lockdown, everyone have to adapt to remote learning and working and reduce the need of traveling. So virtual meeting will be much more common in the future, even after COVID-19. And also people walk and buy more to avoid public transport as a result of coronavirus. So that's a good thing if we keep the habit after post-pandemic. And as we're moving toward the end of the pandemic and the vaccine came out, I think it's a good time now that we engage more young people and people of color and immigrants to get involved with climate advocacy, because we've been through this tough time and adjust to this circumstance, so everybody understand what it's like to like live in a crisis. So like we can talk to them, like people understand how disruptive it can be to live in a crisis. So it's easier to talk to them about climate change and how it will affect us. So like they're more likely to take action to prevent future outbreaks. And some of the individual action that young people can take post-COVID-19 is join environmental club and continue to educate yourself and talk to your school and your family about these topics, and also use your skill to raise awareness. Like we can definitely use a lot of like different things, like writing poem or making videos or making advocacy videos or art, like many different things to talk about the climate crisis and to raise awareness. So this is the one of the projects that I did with Advocacy, climate advocate, to like
I think we only have another few minutes because Professor Mann has to leave. So just any concluding words, Nee, that you'd like to share, just so that I think that the issue is important, and thank you for the presentation. But I just wondered, in order to respect Professor Mann's time, if you wanted to just say concluding last few words, and then maybe we can get one question in before.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So like my point is just basically like post COVID-19, some of the individual action that we should take post COVID-19 is like continue our habits.
Thank you.
Less traveling and you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nee. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem. I'm gonna stop sharing right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that we don't spill over, as Professor Mann has to leave. But if there was,
I can stay a few minutes late. So,
okay, yeah. For a question. Okay, so let's just invite anybody here who might. Carter, I think you. Hey, yeah. Good to see you, Carter. Thank you for joining.
Hi, how are you? I'm so sorry about that. Just a lot of complications going on at home right now.
No, not at all. We're thinking of you, and thank you for being here. I don't know, Carter, whether you had a question, you wanted to share something in the context of the amazing work you're doing. We have a few more minutes, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, I can share really quickly. So my name is Carter Reese. I am the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called One More Generation that I started along with my sister about 12 years ago to raise awareness about endangered species and plastic pollution. And while we were working with endangered species and learning about the environment, we learned that climate change was one of the biggest issues that was facing everything. In 2019, I actually went to Ecuador and got to see firsthand how the effects of the temperature rising is affecting the different species on different mountaintops and everything. We actually discovered a few new species of frogs and salamander while we were there. And a few of those have now gone extinct because the temperature has risen too far above what they're used to, which is very sad. I got to present with Summer at the pop movement as well. We were the MCs, and like Summer said, it was definitely a life-changing experience because there were so many high-level people that knew exactly what they were talking about, and you could ask them questions, and you could get to know them on a personal basis, and it definitely helped me as a person grow and also realize what other things I need to be focusing on with One More Generation. So we've started different campaigns to specifically target the youth and talk to them about climate change, because we believe that education is the #1 key to fixing any issue, because you can't fix something you don't know about. And there's very few people now that don't know about climate change. It's just getting those few people who don't necessarily believe in it to switch over at this point. I've had very many people come to me and tell me that they don't believe in it. And once they get all the information, it's hard not to change your mind at that point. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll kind of cut it there, but thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carter. I wondered if anybody had a quick question, and we could try and take that. Professor Mann, if you have a minute, and we'd love to seek your thoughts if there are any additional questions, just in case you have a minute to spare.
Sure thing, yeah.
Thank you. Ian or anyone else? Ivan?
Yeah.
Yes, hermano, please.
Thank you, hermano. So my question is, you talk about when companies are the ones who are failing to keep with the regulations and preventing the pollution in the air, precisely, well, more specifically, but what happens when the governments of a country, when the government of a country is the one that is like going against the environment?
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. That's it's a really important point, because we do often talk about the responsibilities of individuals and of companies, but what about the responsibilities of governments? And we have some examples of bad actors. Certainly Russia has really done a lot in recent years to try to block action on climate. I've sometimes described them as the coalition of the unwilling, a small number of petrostates. And the United States under Donald Trump was one of them. But Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, a relatively small number of nation states that had really worked to, block global progress on climate. And we have to hold those bad actors responsible. Australia right now is an excellent example. And I spent some time down there, and I know that the people of Australia in general get it, and they want their policymakers to do something. But right now, their prime minister, Scott Morrison, really is a rubber stamp for the fossil fuel industry. And he refuses to make any meaningful commitments or pledges, for example, as the rest of the world, as we're seeing countries, ratchet up their pledges under the Paris Agreement going into the next conference of the party. Even the UK, Boris Johnson, who would have suspected that he would be a climate hawk, but he's turned out to be. Their pledge is quite bold, and the EU. But Australia is lagging behind. And the good thing is that Morrison is starting to feel that pressure, the pressure of the international community, the pressure of his own people, who I hope will vote to unseat him and to basically put the current governing party, the Liberal National Coalition. Liberal sounds progressive, but it's not. Those are the conservatives in Australia. There's going to be an election probably next year where the people will have an opportunity to use their voice in the form of their vote to throw out politicians who refuse to act and to vote in those who will. So you're absolutely right. We need to use every tool at our disposal to make sure that our countries, our nations, and that means our governments, and that often means our presidents or prime ministers, are acting on our behalf rather than as a rubber stamp for polluters. And that's one of the greatest tools that we have, at least in democratic nations, is our vote. And we have to use it, and we have to use our voice in every way possible. And just speaking out, as I'm trying to remember the name of Nee, I think, in her presentation. It was really important. She talked about all the ways that we can express our voice and all the ways we can impact the dialogue and the conversation with our friends, with our family members. just use every tool at your disposal, because ultimately collective action requires individuals working together to affect change, and we can do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mann. It's 5 minutes past 5 now. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to ask Drishya if she wanted to conclude the session. But before that, I do want to say thank you so much, Professor Mann, for all that you do, for your invaluable support, for your leadership and your insights, which definitely are key guiding light to us. So thank you very, very much. And I also want to thank the amazing voices that we've had from on the ground, Carter, Summer, Nee, Ian. It's been amazing to hear you. And thank you, Karina, for joining, and all the rest of the POP family for being here with us. We're delighted. And so honored. And I'm hoping that we can take this forward, because no doubt this is an area that's extremely important. And Professor Mann has repeatedly talked about the importance of the youth movements and action led by youth. But at the same time, we have to understand what the system has and where we stand with respect to the system, and not let the system off the hook either. So I just want to say thank you so much for your wisdom and all the values you share with us, which we embrace very closely. And with that, Drishya, I'll let you conclude.
Well, let me just thank you, Ash, and thank all of you. You inspire me, and we can change the world. So let's do it.
Thank you. Thank you. That means the world to us too, and certainly together we will. And if everybody here agrees, could we just get a quick picture too before we close out? And if you could turn on your
I'm ready.
Your cameras. Hey, Ian.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute, because my screen is
all
not.
Right. We'll get a screenshot.
Okay, thank you so much.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, great.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mann.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Thank you, Professor Mann.
Thank you, Professor Mann. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so
and
much.
Thank you for being a precious part of the POP family.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My honor.
you.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Thank you to everyone for joining us. We have the closing ceremony in an hour. But before that, I would like to mention that all the sessions that happened during these 6 days of the festival are on YouTube, and most of them are on Facebook as well. Please do go like, share more and more with your friends, and take the wisdom and knowledge that has been shared throughout these 6 days, because each and every session was full of knowledge, experience, and a lot of inspiration and motivation. So with that, I would request you that we are sharing our social media handles in the chat, so you can follow us there. Go to the YouTube channel of the Pop Movement, which is by the name Pop Movement. Watch all the sessions, share it with your friends, and do not forget to use the hashtag Pop Festival 2021. We'll see you next year again with lots of information. But before that, we'll have a closing ceremony where we invite all those who have presented their projects, because it's time for awards and also celebration with the Pop team. And I'm sure we'll share a lot more what are future plans. So stay connected with us, and we will see you in an hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
And don't miss that there's going to be plenty of music and dance. I know sadly only virtually, but we're going to enjoy it. And I want to say our very own hermano Edgar is going to be performing too, and we can't wait. So thank you so much for your amazing gift and for sharing it with us. And yes, and let's meet up for the celebration in less than an hour now.
Bye.